So today's talk is from a Sannyasini's diary, Memories of Great Monks. When we come into contact with Vedanta, a wonderful world opens up to us. We enter into a worldwide family of Ramakrishna devotees, monastic and lay. Lives spent in meditation and selfless service are something special. They have the power to touch us deeply and draw us into spiritual life. And every once in a while, we come across a great soul, one who has been touched and inspired by other extraordinarily great souls, such as the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna or Sri Sarada Devi. So this talk is the beginning of a 12-part series called Memories of Great Monks I've had the privilege of knowing. And these are stories that have been culled from my diaries over a 50-year span of time while in the convent, both in Santa Barbara and in Hollywood. So today, let us begin with the memories of Swami Pravrajika, disciple of Swami Brahmananda, who also knew Sri Sarada Devi and most of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. And he happened to be my guru. In September 1967, I entered the college in Los Angeles, and it was a tumultuous time in America. It was during the anti-Vietnam War movement and the rising civil rights movement. And it was also known as the Great Church Exodus, when 60 to 70% of Christians and Jews left their congregations. Though Protestant Christians, my parents left the church when I was 12 years old, though they never left their faith. But by the time I entered college, I was agnostic. Then during my freshman year, my father died unexpectedly, and my world suddenly turned gray. I found myself asking the big question, is this all there is? It wasn't a theological question stemming from mere curiosity, but a deeply personal, agonizing inquiry that came from the depth of my being like an unremitting prayer. Comparative religions had just entered the college and university curriculum in America. A year or so later, I was compelled to take a course on the world's religions from a divinity school-trained Calvinist professor. In those days, the professors were divinity school trained. Our college text was Houston Smith's book, The Religions of Man, which is now the world's religions. Houston Smith, a Vedantin, former president of the Vedanta Society of St. Louis, was a leading scholar of religious studies in the United States, and he became one of the world's most influential figures in religious studies. Aside from our text, the professor arranged field trips for us to various churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples in the Los Angeles area. One day he announced, we're going to the Vedanta temple to meet the spiritual grandson of Ramakrishna. And I wondered, who could that be? That week, the entire class drove to the iconic Hollywood Vedanta temple. And as I walked into the temple, there was Swami Pravrajika seated cross-legged on the shrine dais, giving a Bhagavad Gita class. I don't remember what he said, but at that moment I knew I was seeing for the first time in my life a man of God. And at that moment, I knew that religion was true. In 1970, I drove to the Santa Barbara temple to meet the Swami at the Vedanta Center there. It's a 50-acre paradise nestled against the Sannyasini Mountains, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It's in the National Forest. And soon after, I withdrew from college and moved to Santa Barbara to be near the temple, the nuns, and Swami. Twice a month, Swami Pravrajika traveled to Santa Barbara and stayed at the center for 5 days at a time. At those times, the nuns arranged for me to stay in the only guest accommodation available, the laundry room. But to me, it was heaven on earth. Swami Pravrajika took all his meals at the convent. So in a relaxed and natural atmosphere, I was able to associate with him. I would listen to his conversation, his humor, and the natural flow of spiritual anecdotes that he shared, and the teachings he gave unstintingly throughout the day to his nuns and guests, mostly devotees. Every summer, Swami Pavitrananda, Swami Brahmananda's disciple as well, from the Vedanta Society of New York, would visit his Gurubai in Santa Barbara. Swami Pavitrananda was a staunch Advaitin. He was a former president of Advaita Ashram, and he was a trustee of the order. He was very formal and a bit puritanical, and so Swami would love to tease him at the table. And in return, Swami Pavitrananda remained silent and stoic, but devoted to Swami. Swami Swahananda from the Vedanta Society of Berkeley or senior Swamis from Europe or India would also visit Swami in the summer. And during Swami's Santa Barbara stay, I would often find him relaxing in his easy chair, talking with devotees or having a private interview with one of the nuns. But it was the evenings after Arati that I cherished the most. At that time, the nuns would gather in the convent living room with their sewing, knitting, or ghee-light preparations. A senior nun would read aloud from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and Swami Pravrajika would reminisce about the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna he had met. All but Swami Yogananda, Niranjanananda, Trigunatitananda, Ramakrishnananda, and Vivekananda. Stories that had never before been published. What were those stories? Often how these great souls taught in Swami Prabhupananda's words. Swami Premananda taught me one of my first lessons on the behavior of a saint. He said, just after I had joined, I happened to be present while he scolded another boy vehemently. I thought to myself, this holy man loses his temper. But as soon as that thought crossed my mind, Swami Premananda looked at me and smiled. He immediately gave me to understand that he was not really angry, but that he was making a show of anger in order to teach the boy a lesson. The oral tradition of stories would sometimes reveal how the Lord comes to his devotees. In 1915, when Swami Prabhupada and Guru Das Maharaj, later Swami Atulananda, a great Advaitin and the first Western saint in the Ramakrishna order, were both brahmacharins and decided to make a pilgrimage to Kedar Badri in the Himalayas. As Guru Das was handicapped, he had to be carried in a dandi. So their entourage included those hired to carry the dandi and their bedding, plus a cook. Their weeks-long pilgrimage met with adventures, hardships, and yes, tragedy, including an avalanche that almost overwhelmed them and the death of an unknown pilgrim who fell into the river below their path and was swept away. It was also possible that Guru Das Maharaj would not be admitted into the temple of their destination, as he was a Westerner. Swami related, finally, we arrived at Badri Narayan. All the pilgrims sat down, waiting for the temple to open. We too were seated to one side. A bright-looking young priest, about 20 to 24 years old, beckoned to me. He said, ask your friends to come and follow me. He took us to a side of the temple where it was not crowded. When he opened the temple door, some other pilgrims wanted to enter also, but he told them, no, this is not for you. The four of us went in with him, and he closed the door behind us. But here is the peculiar thing Swami used to tell us. Generally, a priest stands to one side or in front, facing the deity. But this priest stood in line with the deity, facing us, which is never done. We stayed and looked and had our darshan. After a few minutes, the priest asked, have you had enough darshan? We came out, but the priest did not leave the temple. He closed the door behind us. Again, we were seated with the pilgrims. Then another man beckoned to me. Ask your friends to come with me. The head priest wants to see you. We went, and the head priest with great courtesy made us sit by him. He then asked in Hindi about Guru Das Maharaj. To what race does this man belong? I knew a little Hindi, Swami said, and I answered, you have no right to inquire about the race or caste of a monastic. He explained that he himself did not mind, but as Guru Das Maharaj's skin was white, other people would make trouble with him. If they saw him entering the temple, he would have to pay a large sum of money to have it purified. The head priest asked the three of us not to go into the temple either, as we ate with Guru Das Maharaj. But he was very kind to us. Every hour he would wave the arati lights before the deity and would let us watch from the open temple door. At that time, he would not permit other pilgrims to enter the temple. We never told him or anyone else there that we had already been inside the temple. For 3 days and 3 nights, the four of us were practically guests of the head priest. There were about 7 or 8 priests at Badri Narayan, and we met them all, but we never saw the young priest again, who had conducted us into the temple when we first arrived. From Badri Narayan on the way back to Mayavati, Guru Das Maharaj and I stopped at Almora, where Swami Turiyananda, a direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, was then staying in the Ramakrishna kutir. As soon as the Swami heard my voice, Swami used to tell us, he came running outside into the cold to meet me. Think of his love. We stayed with Swami Turiyananda for 3 days, and we told him the story of our pilgrimage. When he heard about our first darshan at Badri Narayan, when the young priest had taken us inside the temple, he became excited and exclaimed, "You foolish boys, don't you realize that it was the Lord himself who came in this garb and took you inside? Didn't you recognize him?" Later, Swami Prabhavananda said, "Yes, the Lord does come. He comes down. He has love for all mankind, but only a few recognize that love." Swami's stories sometimes reveal the hidden power of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. One story that took place during a visit by Swami Brahmananda to the Madras Math shows that even his brother disciples sometimes underestimated his spiritual power. Maharaj had a disciple who took care of him for a very long time. And this disciple contracted smallpox there at the Madras Math and was sent to a hospital. Swami Ramakrishnananda used to go and visit the disciple there, and the disciple pleaded with Swami Ramakrishnananda, please ask Maharaj to come just once and stand at the door. I want to look at his face once more before I die. Every day, Swami Ramakrishnananda begged Maharaj to go to the hospital, but Maharaj didn't answer him. The disciple died. Then Swami Ramakrishnananda burst out, Maharaj, you are very cruel. Why? This boy served you and he wanted to see you just once more for a moment, and you didn't go. Then Maharaj said, how do you know that I did not go? Stories Swami told revealed the eternal divine play of Sri Ramakrishna, an avatar, and his companions, which could often take place beyond this world as we know it. Swami Subodhananda, an altogether playful, childlike, and approachable direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, once told Swami Pravrajika about an experience he had, but he told it in the third person so that nobody would know who it was. In his words, Swami Subodhananda said, a devotee went on a pilgrimage to Kedarnath. This temple is located very high in the Himalayas, therefore is closed half the year during the snow season. The devotee arrived just as the last priests were leaving before the heavy snows came. He and one priest were the only ones there. He went into the temple and made his offering to the Lord. Then the snow began coming down. It was so heavy that the devotee couldn't leave the temple. So the priest suggested that they play a game of chess. They played all night, and the next morning the snow stopped. The devotee could go on his way home, but he didn't realize that 6 months had passed. Koka Maharaj said to us, it was Lord Shiva who came in the form of the priest. The way Koka Maharaj told the story, Swami said, I knew that he himself was the devotee who had played chess with Lord Shiva. Those evenings were so intimate and the spiritual atmosphere so palpable that I was altogether thrilled and staggered to think that I was a witness to such a rare opportunity. In fact, I used to tell the nuns after Swami would leave, my goodness, I can't believe this. And they had heard these stories for many, many years, and they would smile at me. But at those times, I remember thinking, my God, I'm within the orbit of an incarnation of God, whose stories are being handed down and shared by a disciple of one of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. It was those evenings that made me a nun. In October 1971, Swami Prabhavananda gave me special permission to live at the convent while finishing my last year of college at the University of California at Santa Barbara. He told me, you should finish what you start so it won't be a pull later on. And that was a teaching I always upheld from then on, whatever the endeavor. Swami used to take 2 walks a day when he was in Santa Barbara, one mid-morning and one late afternoon, often joined by a large following of devotees. But one day, I had the good fortune to walk alone with Swami. And so I mustered my nerve to be like Naren, the future Vivekananda, and I asked my guru his famous question, "Have you seen God?" Swami stopped walking and looked at me. "Yes," he said. That was all. Swami Pravrajika used to share his spiritual experiences with his monastics only, and we in turn would never divulge them to others. His greatest experience took place during a pilgrimage to India in March 1936 at the Jagannath Temple in Puri with his brother disciple, Swami Nirvanananda, the future vice president of the Ramakrishna order, who was given the boon of Brahmagyana by Swami Brahmananda just before his Mahasamadhi. In Swami's own words, one of the priests was our guide. In order to enter the innermost shrine, one has to go by a passage to the left of the shrine, inside the huge temple. As we were about to enter this passage, I suddenly heard a sound like that of thunder coming to strike me. And he said, "I must admit here," he would always explain, "that I was not approaching the shrine with any special reverence or devotion. Indeed, I was rather dry in my heart." He went on, "For a moment, as the thunder actually struck me, I was terrified. But I had no time to go on being afraid, for I lost consciousness. I faintly heard my brother disciple asking the priest to take hold of my left arm. He himself was already holding my right arm. After they had taken my arms, I was not conscious that anyone was supporting me. I must have had a little consciousness left in me, though I was not aware who I was or where I was. I felt intoxicated, as if I had drunk bottles of wine, and I remember I was dragging my feet. Then, as I came nearer to the sanctum sanctorum, there arose within me, in English, the word God, 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 although my mother tongue is Bengali. Then a thrill passed through my whole being, and as I entered into the inner shrine, I became completely unconscious of the external world. All I had was an awareness that I was experiencing a vision which suddenly opened up. I do not know if my eyes were open or closed. I did not see the shrine with walls around me, nor did I see the crowd of pilgrims who must have been there, nor did I see the images of the deities in the shrine. I only saw an ocean of light and waves of bliss striking me, which increased in intensity and beggared all descriptions. I do not know how long I was in the shrine, but I do remember that when I was brought out of the shrine and stood in the open courtyard of the temple, I felt that I was being held by my arms, and so I stood up straight and shook myself free. Much later, I asked my brother disciple how he knew that I was about to lose consciousness. He simply replied, "I lived a long time with Maharaj, Swami Brahmananda. That's how I know." While I lived in the convent during Swami Prabhavananda's remaining years, I saw him enter into ecstasy several times, including October 6, 1973, during our Durga Puja celebration at the Santa Barbara Temple. The temple was packed with over 300 Southern California devotees, and Swami was seated in his chair near the inner shrine. Suddenly, the atmosphere became electric and Swami's head fell back. Mother came, he told us, after Swami Chaitananda, our assistant minister, took Swami's arm and escorted him from the temple to his room. Swami took care to train us and inquire about our spiritual lives. Once, when Swami gathered all of the Santa Barbara nuns in his room for a spiritual talk, he explained, there are two types of aspirants, the mystic and the non-mystic. I am a mystic. Yes, I have had various experiences in my life. However, my children, don't hanker after visions. You must understand that visions come and go. With the non-mystical aspirant, observe their lives, he said. For example, look at Pravrajika, who was the convent's senior nun in charge. See her strength of character, he said. That is the true testament of spirituality. And many times a non-mystic will have the highest experience at the end of their life, he said. So don't judge spirituality on visions alone. But at the same time, Swami would often ask each of us about our meditations and take special care to prod us to go deeper within. What have you experienced, he would question, reminding us the goal of life is to realize God. He also warned us not to share our experiences with others, as that dissipates the experience and may arouse jealousy in others. It can also prompt the listener to imagine themselves into having a similar experience. Every morning, the Swami would meditate with us, and we could set our watches by the sound of tinkling bells hanging from a magnolia tree near the flagstone path that led to the convent's little shrine in the convent interior. Swami would ring them as he passed by on his way to the shrine. But in his last years, when Swami could no longer manage that morning walk to the little shrine, we would meditate with him in his room. Every morning, it was the same ritual. First, he would bow down to the photograph of Swami Brahmananda, seated in Samadhi, which was taken in Madras when he was a brahmachari. Swami loved that photo because when Maharaj became slightly annoyed with the photographer who was trying to position him for the photo, he turned to Swami and said, Abhini, you fix me. When Swami adjusted Maharaj's legs in a half lotus position, Maharaj immediately went into Samadhi and the photograph was taken. We would stand as Swami gave each of us Mahaprasad, the rice prasad from the Jagannath temple, in outstretched hands. He would then wave a lighted incense stick to all the holy pictures in his room, and then sit in his chair, and we would sit on the floor near his chair. After a half hour, Swami would end his meditation with his morning chant, a pranam mantra to Swami Brahmananda, followed by Upanishadic chants. At one time, he shared that he would begin his meditation by mentally traveling to places of pilgrimage in India where he had received a special darshan, including the Jagannath temple in Puri in Kanchivaram. It was in Kanchivaram, South India, where Swami was accompanied by Sister Lalita, one of the Mead sisters at whose family home in Pasadena, Vivekananda had stayed in the winter of 1899 and 1900. And as an aside, it was in 1929 that Sister Lalita had given her Hollywood home to Swami Pravrajika, which became the future Vedanta Society of Southern California in 1930. Being a Westerner, Sister Lalita was not allowed to enter the Kanchivaram temple. So Swami and Sister were standing in the outer courtyard of the Shiva temple when a light came from the temple to the place where they were standing, and it struck them both with a blissful vibration and a sound of thunder. Both Swami and Sister saw the light and felt a blissful presence. Swami later said, "I walked in the path of the light to the temple, all the time feeling that blissful shock." He used to say that it is important to relive one's spiritual experiences in order to reawaken and maintain a higher mood of mind before starting one's meditations. And we find this also in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, chapter 1, Sutra 38. He also stressed that after meditation, one should remain quiet for about half an hour, as that is sometimes when an experience comes. This particular photograph was taken by Swami Krishnananda, Swami's attendant, right after Swami Brahmananda's birthday puja. And we in Hollywood celebrate Swami Brahmananda's puja, and the nuns from Santa Barbara and the monks from Trabuco Canyon would go to Hollywood for that special puja. And Swami Pravrajika would always be in a mood at that time for all of the special observances, but in particular, he was in a mood that day. We didn't stay long, but this particular photograph was taken before we entered his room. Swami Pravrajika realized the importance of ritualistic worship, which he established in the 3 centers in Southern California. And in fact, in Santa Barbara, we perform 2 ritual worships every day, one in the temple and one in our little shrine, the heart of the convent. Swami Pravrajika related how in Hollywood in early days, devotees came and went. But when he started the ritual worship in the Hollywood temple, a core body of devotees grew. And if you ever have the opportunity to go to the Hollywood temple, that little shrine, the little teakwood shrine where the photographs of Sri Ramakrishna and Mother and Swami Brahmananda and Swami Vivekananda are, that was blessed by 2 of the direct disciples of Ramakrishna during Swami's 1936 pilgrimage to India. He had bought the little shrine, and it was in his room, and they each came into his room and placed their hand on the teakwood shrine for an hour as they talked to him. Swami used to explain to us the efficacy of ritual worship. In 1919, when he came to the Ramakrishna Mat in Bhubaneswar, he had an experience that convinced him. He told us, "On the 3rd day of performing the ritualistic worship, I did not offer salt to Sri Ramakrishna with the offerings of cucumber and sweets. While making the food offering, it is usual to come out of the shrine, close the doors, and meditate that the Lord is eating. But the day was hot, I was drowsy, and I laid down. A young Brahmin boy with a lighted body appeared to me and said, 'You did not offer Thakur any salt.' Thakur meaning the master, Sri Ramakrishna. 'Thakur cannot take cucumber without salt.' I got up and went to see Swami Atmananda, a senior monk in the Mat, to ask him about it. And he said, yes, that's true. Thakur could not eat cucumber without salt. I asked, what can be done? Swami Atmananda advised, take some salt, open the door of the shrine, place the salt on the food tray, and then come out again. Thus it was proved to me in 3 days that the Lord accepts what we offer. And to this day, in our Southern California centers and wherever we are stationed, including here in Texas, the Lord's tray always includes a small vessel of salt on special puja days. Though Swami never allowed lay devotees to criticize a monastic in his presence, he would often scold his monastics in front of devotees and others at the dining room table or even in the temple before a public lecture. Yes. Once after Pravrajika was reprimanded for adjusting the temperature gauge in the temple, she asked him later why he scolded his disciples so publicly. He replied, to make a greater impression. See, in the scoldings, he's transforming samskaras. And from my own experience, Swami's scoldings, though sometimes extraordinarily harsh and long-lasting, were great blessings. Others also divulged that such scoldings had the capacity to change the inner workings of their minds, to purify the mind. Swami could undoubtedly intuit when the recipient of his scoldings would sometimes feel they had lost his love. And he would then quote words of the Bible just within their hearing. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth. Swami also used his intuition as the grounds to scold a disciple. Once he told one of his cooks, he had a breakfast cook, a lunch cook, and a supper cook. They were three different nuns. Take away my lunch. It was cooked with a divided mind. How could he know? Swami could read our minds like the pages of a book. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the first chapter, Sutra 41, it states that when mental activity lessens, the mind becomes like a transparent crystal that reflects the color of any object nearby. The mind's coloring by whatever comes before it, be it the idea of the knower, the knowing, or the known, is called convergence, concentratedness, and sameness. At one time, Swami divulged the secret. He said, in order to know, I would have to sit down and meditate. Shankara, for instance, would pass by a place and say, a great soul must be living there. But I am not that advanced. This was in the 60s. He was saying, I must sit down and calm my mind, but through the grace of my guru and mother, I can raise my consciousness whenever I want to. At times when a person came to him with a bad motive, without saying anything, the Swami would become extremely dizzy and have to leave the room. Such was his sensitivity as his mind became more and more luminous, like a crystal. Precision in the field of work was the high bar he set for all his disciples in the field of karma yoga. We were instructed to spend an hour every day in the garden, just as Maharaj had instructed him, because it makes a devotee honest, working with the soil in that way. And wherever Swami Brahmananda went, there were beautiful gardens. Once when Pravrajika, our senior nun, related when she was washing the large plate glass windows in the convent living room, which looked up the mountainside, Swami Pravrajika came up quietly behind her. Are you doing your japam? He said. Years later, to a young nun who was washing those same windows, he approached and pointed to the trees and mountains that could be seen through the windows, All this is Brahman, he taught, waving his outstretched hand. To be with Swami Prabhupada and learn from him was the greatest blessing of my life. And it also gave me interest and good fortune to associate with a number of other great Swamis in America and India after his passing, a passing wherein he said, "We never felt he had left us, for he himself promised, 'I shall be with you always.'" And now, friends, let us end with a guided meditation. Sit comfortably, seated in your chair with your feet planted on the ground or in a half lotus or lotus on the floor. Let's close our eyes and take in 4 deep breaths. Breathing in purity and exhaling impurity. Send waves of peace to the north, south, east, and west. For without outer peace, there can be no inner peace. Within the city of Brahman, which is the body, there is the heart. And within the heart, there is a cave. Gently place your mind in the heart. Approach the cave entrance and enter. There, deep within, shines your chosen ideal, the size of a thumb, seated on the luminous lotus of the heart. The body of your chosen ideal is radiant, emanating pure consciousness, loving consciousness, which is light. Allow your mind's eye to rest on the eyes of your beloved, who has experienced the highest realms of consciousness. Your beloved is smiling, full of compassion. Allow your mind's eye to pass from the eyes to the mouth, which has uttered the one truth in so many ways. Then bring your mind's eye down the form to the lotus feet, at which you place your heart's desire. Then up again to the head and rest on the full luminous form. Fill the cave of your heart with the luminosity of your beloved's loving compassion. Allow the form to then dissolve in the effulgence of 1,000 suns as it fills your chest cavity with a light of loving consciousness. It then rises to your throat and your head and extends downward into your lower limbs, feet, and toes. Feel your body as a luminous vessel of loving consciousness radiating the light of your chosen ideal through every pore of your body. The light extends outward and fills the room, pervading everyone and everything in the room. Let it extend outward further into the street, into the city, into the mountains and valleys and beyond. Let it cover the world and embrace all whom you love. Let it embrace strangers whom you have yet to meet. And yes, let it embrace those whom you fear or dislike. Let the light of your beloved embrace all and extend beyond into space. The light of your Atman is one with Brahman, infinite, indestructible, all-pervading, loving consciousness. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.